Rocky Balboa is a fixture of cinema, a brawler with a 1 in a million chance to become world champion, seizing glory with the eye of the tiger. But what if he was real? What if he faced against the true-to-life greatest hand-to-hand fighters of recent memory? Did the Italian stallion really only get by through sheer will, pure luck, or does he actually have what it takes to best history's elite martial artists? We should start by asking, who is the greatest boxer of all time? The most obvious litmus test for arguably the most famous fictional man to ever beat a 10 count. A name that comes to mind instantly is that of Mike Tyson, especially in his prime. Trained by the legendary Customato, Tyson would popularize the peekaboo style to great effect. This form took advantage of Tyson's relatively small stature, incentivizing sound defense, head movement, all to safely close the distance between his opponent and deliver deadly KO power to the head and body. This afforded the legendary fighter a record of 50-7, with 44 of these wins by way of knockout. Throughout his career, he traded with some of the best the sport has ever seen, such as the likes of Lennox Lewis, Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, and Evander Holyfield. The latter, Tyson actually considered his best opponent, in his own words. Even at a young age, he had surpassed the entire youth Olympic team, and as we all know, went on to become the youngest heavyweight champion of the world, a record he holds to this day. What separates Iron Mike from much of his competition, even aside from his fighting skill, is his incredible striking power. His output ranges depending on the source, with the highest of them claiming he could hit with the force of 1,600 joules. To quote essentiallysports.com, it was calculated that Tyson's punching power was equivalent to being hit by a Vespa motorbike at a speed of approximately 9 miles per hour. It could also be compared to falling from a height of nearly 7 feet. This actually exceeded Rocky Marciano's recorded strength levels by over 300 joules. So already, Mike easily outclasses the inspiration for Balboa in terms of striking power. So what would happen if we took Rocky, placed him in the real world, and had him face down Iron Mike at each of their primes in the tried and true squared circle? Well, the best place to start, in my opinion, would be drawing comparisons where the Rocky universe crosses over with our own. See, the boxing film series acts more as an addendum to our world when it comes to fighting history. The Rumble in the Jungle preceded the first super fight between Apollo and Rocky, as referenced in Creed 3, Smokin' Joe Frazier cameos in the first film, and of course Rocky Marciano walked so Balboa could run. This would mean that, at least per the lore, accolades speaking to Apollo or Rocky's stature would encompass the careers of these legendary boxers. So considering statements from reputable sources, such as Rocky's trainer calling Apollo the most dangerous fighter on earth during 1972, with Ali still competing at that time according to the real world. The greatest himself even said that Apollo's fighting moves were based on his own, with sports commentators as of Creed 1, set in 2015, calling Apollo a contender for the GOAT. Add all of this together, and from both an in and out of universe perspective, we have Balboa going the distance with and then beating someone who should just be an all-around better boxer than Muhammad Ali. The reason I bring up the comparison to Ali is because he already defeated a similar fighter to Tyson in the form of Floyd Patterson, who himself was trained by Customato and used a similar style as Tyson, with the greatest beating this precursor to Iron Mike via knockout in the 12th round. It's also worth noting that this fight took place 11 years before Rocky 1 was set, so any parallels or statements calling Rocky or Apollo the greatest, even as early as the first two films, would take their fighting prowess above the likes of either Ali or Patterson. Rocky verbatim had Apollo's skills after Rocky 3, with Creed's techniques proving evergreen against 2015's number 4 ranked light heavyweight boxer. So stylistically, Rocky should have the tools in his kit to deal with Tyson, especially per the fact that by the time he's an out-of-prime boxer in Rocky 6, the best tactician in the series states that Balboa knows everything there is to know about fighting, with Rocky KOing a roided-up super soldier described as the perfect fighter from 1,000 years in the future, after declaring that he's beyond the need for sparring. In fact, the ruthlessness Tyson demonstrated when biting off Evander Holyfield's ear is honestly dwarfed by Ivan Drago's Superman punching Balboa between rounds while performance enhancers coursed through his veins. Iron Mike went out of his way to disavow the use of steroids in the sport, in contrast to the Russian, who, by the way, had a 15-inch reach advantage and 6 inches of height over the Italian stallion. Drago also boxed with the intent to kill and did in fact murder Apollo with zero guilt after the fact. While many boxers or MMA fighters go into battle or reflect on them with this verbiage in the real world, not many of them actually have the blood on their hands to back it up. Rocky went the distance with and floored a perfectly trained, roided up murderer with every stat in his favor, including being 9 years younger than Balboa, with far less wear and tear on his body compared to the champion. This kind of mismatch is pretty much unheard of, and if a fight like this ever took place in the real world, we'd probably have a national holiday and parade celebrating Rocky's victory for years to come. Rocky beating Drago further drives this point home as we compare their striking strength directly, with Ivan sporting nearly 63,000 joules, or about 40 times more powerful than Tyson's strongest speculated punch ever thrown. This is far beyond the capabilities of mortal men and firmly puts the Rocky cast of characters in the superhuman category. The amount of force behind Drago's punches, even with gloves on, is in a similar tier as falling from low Earth orbit and face planting into the ground. And Rocky withstood that level of energy up to 61 times in just the first 3 rounds of their 15-round war. So to summarize, Rocky Balboa simply could not be hurt by even the strongest boxers to ever live. Again, the Stallion's face and body are 40 times more durable than Mike Tyson's hardest punch. A scientist in a lab could clone Mike 40 times, they could all jump Rocky, and they would still lose. Boxing, however, has been around at least since ancient Greece, with the advent of mixed martial arts redefining what it means to be the ultimate fighter. Since the UFC began in 1993, we've all witnessed an uphill culmination in various fighting styles, with the greatest practitioners merging and optimizing martial arts from around the world, with contemporary boxing being simply a single tool in their arsenals. So if we expand our purview, how would Rocky fare inside the octagon? Could he beat the likes of John Jones, GSP, Demetrius Johnson? Insert your goat here. I'm not about to argue who the objective best UFC fighter is, just how Rocky would generally perform against the modern day titans. To get this out of the way, Rocky's physical peak is in the 4th film, wherein he weighed 204 pounds, placing him right near the light heavyweight class, which has featured some of the UFC's greatest fighters, including John Jones and Alex Pereira. Comparing Balboa to other boxers like Tyson is obviously much more succinct, but no less hypothetical, than contrasting him with modern-day MMA. But it's not impossible. In the real world, boxers have traditionally struggled to cross their skills over against more versatile fighters, bouts such as James Toney versus Randy Couture in 2010, where the world-class 3 title-holding boxer was humbled by the former heavyweight champion. Arguably, both fighters were out of their primes, yet Toney couldn't bridge the gap despite his mastery. This echoed Ali's 1976 fight against Antonio Inoki, a Japanese pro wrestler who actually fought with his hands tied behind his back here. metaphorically speaking. He was barred from using throws or tackles against the greatest, and he still went as far as drawing with debatably the best boxer of all time after 15 rounds by prioritizing kicks targeted at Ali's legs. Their stats were surprisingly pretty comparable too, mirroring the standards of current day weight classes. Compared to MMA, conditioning your whole life to become the best boxer possible will naturally create gaps, with many other examples of this discrepancy throughout the decades since the advent of UFC. Even mixed martial artists adapting multiple styles can still have a deficit if their training isn't all-encompassing, which leads to the old styles make fights saying. But would this actually happen to Rocky, this fictional boxer who surpasses the real-world Ali? I don't think so. Stallone's character has a background in street fighting, as well as dirty or unorthodox boxing. This is evident in Rocky V, where we see an out-of-prime post-Drago fight Stallion use a combination of elbows, leg takedowns, throws, reversals, mixed with his foundational boxing skills to beat the current heavyweight champ, Tommy Gunn. Now, I'm certainly not saying Gunn is as good a mixed martial artist as any of the UFC talent named so far, but this shows that Balboa might not suffer the same flaws as James Toney or Ali. What further punctuates this point is Rocky's fight against Thunderlips, ironically a more impressive display than his beating Clubber Lang in the same movie. Rocky was 202 pounds canonically here, and he managed to counter an enraged offense from a 6'9", 390-pound undisputed wrestling champion. Rocky took strikes, tosses, a backbreaker, leg and elbow drops, and after removing his gloves, he returned in kind with strikes to the body and a rear naked choke, finally lifting and tossing the near 400-pound man out of the ring, surviving long enough to officially draw. Again, let me say, this is the undisputed wrestling champion of the world who is trying to maim Balboa, who was only there for a charity match. It was likely not the case that he trained to even just go the distance. He was just there to have fun. Based on this, I think it would be unfair to lump Balboa in with boxers woefully ill-equipped to combat other styles. Thunderlips is actually just beyond the weight max for even UFC heavyweights. The physical prowess that Rocky displayed in managing to survive and basically submit someone with a 188-pound weight and nearly a whole foot height advantage, especially a world-class wrestler, would be something so unreal that if it took place, everyone in attendance would sooner believe it was fake or rigged. Do my eyes deceive me type shit. Ask yourself, if John Jones shrunk by 6 inches and 20 to 40 pounds depending on his fight weight, could he somehow manage to beat Tom Aspinall after he trained and bulked to add about 30 pounds, even with both of them having roughly the same skill in the same sport? If you're Dana, you'll say yes, but let's be real. If Jones managed this, it would pretty much be unironically less impressive than Rocky doing what he did to Thunderlips, especially just in terms of raw durability and strength. Imagine if he just threw the other guy out of the octagon. So, stylistically and power-wise, Rocky's got a good chance if he played by the rules, even in the face of the UFC's restrictions and regulations. But where I think he particularly shines is in the hypothetical, all-out, truly life-on-the-line fight he were to have with the current best of the best. You see, and some might find this hard to believe, but Sly Stallone himself said that in a street fight between his two creations, Rocky would win if he caught Rambo early on, otherwise Rambo would use his full lethality to attack the eyes, throat, etc., likely winning with Rocky proving yet resilient with good ground game by comparison. Rambo being irrevocably physically damaged even if he won. I have to emphasize, Stallone wrote each Rocky film and directed most of them, with him having either a screenplay, story, or combination of director credit in all Rambo movies. He is naturally an authority on these characters beyond even merely playing them. If you accept this, it takes Rocky's potential for mixed martial arts to a new level, beyond what he showcased outright in the films. Rambo is a Green Beret veteran of Vietnam called the best hand-to-hand fighter outright, within the context of the entire military. Not to make this a Rambo video per se, but suffice that to the extent that Rocky was made a superhuman boxing champion, so too was Rambo written as a super soldier. He's described as a perfect warrior, master of several martial arts, and showcases various techniques resembling modern-day MMA with greater lethality. Here comes in the distinction of mindset, which can make or break a fight or fighter. When it comes to the topic of a soldier versus a mixed martial artist, such as a Green Beret, the consensus, as much as there ever is one in fight science, is that the restrictions and non-lethal nature of the UFC would hamper the servicemen more so. They're trained for two similar yet very different missions. Similar in principle to Ali versus Inoki. In the military, it's about literal survival at all costs as opposed to knocking out or even outscoring your opponent for large sums of money. Not to devalue the mission statement of every sport-minded martial artist, but the fact is likely that if someone trained for Daniel Craig 007 type environmental combat at the risk of losing your own life, that person is probably outperforming a UFC fighter, at least by those terms. And by that same token, if we took a Green Beret and forced him to adhere to MMA rules, it likely wouldn't go well for him. You obviously can't eye gouge or bang your opponent's head against the ground and like all that crazy military Jason Bourne type stuff you see in the movies. You just can't do that in the MMA. If we grant Rocky the ability that Stallone describes for him though, it means he could brutally injure a warrior with a killer instinct who would use literally everything he could to win. Not to mention that Rambo can like rip people's throats out with his bare hands, outpace helicopter rounds, dodge or anticipate rifle fire in a thunderstorm, and on and on. When looking at all of this, I think it's hard to dispute that Rocky wouldn't dominate the current day MMA, or even its peak if you think it's fallen off. He's far more well-rounded skill-wise than even the best in real-life boxers, managing to go toe-to-toe with champion wrestlers that far outclass him on paper, and according to the series writer and director, he could essentially match a Green Beret super soldier in skill, will, and physical endurance. And if you disagree with all of that, remember that Rocky is durable enough to survive falling from orbit probably over 100 times. Or again, over 15 times stronger than Francis Ngannou's hardest punch, known to be one of, if not the hardest IRL strikers in mixed martial arts. I hope I showcased thus far that if Rocky existed and competed in the real world, he would be likely deified and mythified as the best to ever do it. Would there be room for two of these icons? Naturally, I'm talking about Bruce Lee, a bedrock of modern combat, a philosopher, and student of innumerable fighting tactics. He has garnered the most comparisons akin to Ali, cementing him as a gold standard pretty much due to whispers of purported feats of superhuman stature. So if we took these legends at face value, would the borderline godly martial artist hold a candle to the fictional Philly boxer? Lee's best feats have been well reported already in YouTube videos. His strength was such that he could kick apart a 100-pound sandbag with a mere sidekick, with rumors speculating he even kicked around a 700-pound bag, yielding around 6,400 joules according to certain calculations. His speed was also pretty unheard of, with it being reported that he was simply too fast for film cameras of his era, with the skill necessary to inspire even peak fighters of today. With UFC welterweight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson saying that if Bruce were born in time to meet his prime during the sport, he'd be spoken of in the same class as Conor McGregor. Before the well, you know. The Irishman himself said in 2014 that Lee would be world champ of MMA. Many people argue against this, stating the lack of concrete feats for Lee, but even as far back as in 1985 in an issue of Black Belt magazine, Joe Louis, no, the other Joe Louis, a pro kickboxer and karate pioneer in the US, who often fought Chuck Norris, called Lee the greatest martial artist. Not to dig up ancient Facebook memes, but Norris is a genuine black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo with many official victories to his name. So one of his peers holding Bruce in a high esteem isn't something to be taken lightly. That being said, even the most insane playground rumor I heard from my uncle's dog's pet hamster whispered about Bruce Lee pales in comparison to Rocky's feats. Estimates of Lee's speed being faster than the 24 frames per second camera of his day, even at face value, fall short of the real-world certified fastest punches, that being Keith Liddell's 45-mile-per-hour record. That's something a peak boxer can achieve in reality, much less the verbatim superhumans that populate Rocky's. Rambo, who Rocky is near equal to according to their creator or writer, could either dodge outright or anticipate automatic gunfire. The latter would grant them reaction speeds of 2,250 miles per hour or supersonic, and the former option would be such an insane skill feat that it's almost equally as hard to fathom. Imagine just setting up the peak fighter of your choice in the dark woods amidst poor weather. If they could somehow perfectly time or possibly read the slight muscle movements of the shooter, that'd basically be just as impossible as being outright faster than the bullets. Which is what Rambo does. It's just on screen. The guy presses the trigger, we hear the bullets go off, and Rambo moves after they're fired. I don't know what to tell you. To not grant Rocky the speed point here would kind of be asserting that John Jones could dodge bullets fired from dozens of feet away. Alright, Dana, just calm down. Knocking around a 700-pound punching bag, again clocked at around 6,400 joules, is only about a mere tenth of Drago's strength. Remember, falling from orbit like Master Chief. In terms of skill, it gets interesting, as Lee admired Muhammad Ali greatly and even trained to mimic his footwork and overall style, actually calling him the best fighter around. Rocky, per the lore, is a greater boxer than Ali, with his own skills plus Apollo Creed's. And to that end, Balboa is simply far too durable for Lee to even hurt at all, either in an octagon or a street fight. With everything said, I hope I managed to convince you all that Rocky Balboa is far more than just a champion boxer. Maybe you thought he was a gritty brawler who got lucky, or even just a remarkably skilled boxer, but I think the fact is he'd dominate most, if not all, real-world metrics for strength and skill. He's up there with boxing goats whom surpassed debatably the best the sport's produced in the real world, with an extra array of street fighting and mixed martial arts tactics, allowing him to go the distance with Green Beret super soldiers, all backed by speeds faster than bullets and strength 10 times that of even the most mythical of fighting legends. Unless Balboa does his typical shtick of letting his opponent just hit him in the face over and over to prove how strong he is and that he can take all the punishment, he might still win either way. Like I said, bro, Rocky versus Master Chief might be a closer topic.